Hey everyone, in this video, I want to break down the foundation of a good PBR texturing workflow. If you watched my last video, this one's a follow-up where I go step by step on how to apply that workflow. Now, PBR texturing sounds really complicated, but once you understand how layers, channels, masks, and the blending modes all work with each other, Substance Painter, or even the PBR texturing workflow starts to make a lot more sense. So here's the big thing I want you paying attention to. We're not just using pre-made materials and just hoping that it looks good. We're building these materials layer by layer. We have a base material, we have roughness, height, dirt, wear. Every single layer's got one job. So what you're about to see is a full submodule from my game art program. But this section alone should give you a solid foundation for how I actually think through PBR materials. So let's get into it. So you'll see how we break this down with base material. We add a base color variation, and that's only coming through and modifying our base color channel. And this is the key thing that I want you to start thinking about is as you go through the texturing process is think about texturing on a per channel basis where you have base color, roughness, metallic, height, normal, AO, because these are just affecting our base color, while the next set of layers are impacting our roughness like you see here. And that's a little bit of base color, and this impact is coming through our roughness variation. Then we have height, where we can start to get damage detail and the imperfections, and a lot of the storytelling that's coming through scratches, grunge, wear. And this is coming again primarily through our height and a little bit of color and a little bit of roughness. Each one of these layers is adding on to the next and adding a level of subtlety that's helping build a complex, believable material. Then of course, we have wear and tear, and then you can apply global effects like this dirt. And now it's applying dirt to everything within our material. So we're gonna build this up from scratch. Open up a blank Substance Painter and go to File, New. And for this, we'll simply use our preview sphere. So I have a preview sphere already here as an FBX. So I'll set my document resolution to 2048, leave compute tangent and disable all my other settings. With this set up here, we can head straight to our baking menu with this little croissant here, set our output size to 2048, set super sampling a little bit higher so we have cleaner aliasing, and we're not doing a high to low, we're just doing a self bake. Simply bake this textures. We can double check our channels by toggling B. So you can see we have ambient occlusion, curvature map, position, thickness, height, bent normals, opacity. Great, looks great. So if we press F9, that'll take us back to painting mode or hit the icon up here. I'll start with going to this layer here and just simply doing a delete and adding a new fill layer. And in this fill layer, we will enable all of our channels. So I'll set up height, roughness, metallic, and normal. And we'll add ambient occlusion later. We want this to be a metallic material, so I'll set up metallic to be 1. We can head to our color, make it a little bit darker, and slightly increase our roughness. Now for our display properties, what I like to do is match Unreal Engine, which is actually very close to what we have in Blender. You can go to display settings, and for starters, I like a more neutral type of environment map. If we look at our environment opacity, and if I increase that, disable blur, you can see there's actually a lot of color here. There's a lot of warm color here, which is affecting the color of the object since we're using a physically based rendering workflow. So I'll typically switch my environment to one of these here towards the bottom. We have Studio Back Soft, we have Studio 2 Rings, but I like one that has just a nice neutral, pretty much black and white studio here with a nice key light is going to be fantastic for what we're trying to build. So I'll set the opacity back to 0 and I won't worry about blur. If I hold shift now and right mouse button move, you see that we have a nice key light with some good fill lights to help light our object. Then if we head down, you see that we have activate post-process effects. The main one that I want to affect or enable is tone mapping. If I open up tone mapping, enable that, I'll set this to sensitometric here, if that's how you say it. And this gives us a lot of that punchy contrast that we're typically used to. If you don't want to work with this, you don't have to, but this is a good way to get really nice contrast to help make our materials pop. We then, of course, have LUTs, which is lookup tables. So if we activate color profile, I can change this to sRGBF. There we go. And this is going to mimic a real-time engine like Unreal Engine and Blender. Now, Blender does use, if we jump over here, I go to my render properties and just scroll towards the bottom. You can see that it is using a display device. Obviously, I'm on sRGB. View transforms AGX. You can actually look between Filmic, Standard. Well, the default now is AGX, which handles the color and value spectrum a lot better than the standard view transform. So this is what is going to give us a closer one-to-one between engines. So with all of that, let's continue to build. We'll call this base with all of our channels enabled. It goes without saying that it always helps to constantly look at what we're trying to reference. For example, we're looking at a worn metal. You can see we have examples of other metals, and what I encourage you to do is take a look at whatever material you're trying to achieve and break them down mentally and through studying what each layer is going to be. I'll add this to the PureRef, but I was setting up a Miro board because I wasn't sure if I wanted to use Miro or PureRef. When I look at some of these example objects here, we can take a look and see where all of this detail is coming from. And so for something like this metal, we have a base metal. We're going to try to push through the albedo and the base color, and we're going to try to push the roughness through a separate roughness channel as well. This one's composed of a lot of rust and dirt. And then if you look at this wood, here you can see I've started to number, okay, I have a wood base, a little bit higher roughness, fine grain, low height. The next one I do is, okay, there's going to be a paint peel with thin paint layer, low height, grunge peel. Then I start to add scratches. We have layered scratches, different types of scratching. And each one of these is going to be a separate layer within Substance Painter. We have another layer that's going to be glue, paint splatter, layer of glue and debris. And this helps better understand how I would try to build a complex material like this, whether it's going to be a wood or a worn down metal like this. So this is what we're using for our inspiration and guide, right? Because you don't want to sit there and just texture from memory. And there's definitely a fun time is once you really start getting comfortable with this, there's an entire exploratory aspect of it where you're just exploring, but always come back to your reference. So with that in mind, we know that we have this base material and we will be trying to build and push the albedo here through a series of layers, which is going to be color variation. So I'll create a new layer, and in this layer, I will just push this with color. So we have this nice neutral material. I'll call this color variation. And typically I'll add a number just for one because I'll do a series and layers of these color variations. And base color now, for metals, depending on the type of metals, we can add in a nice blue tint. So if I add in just a subtle blue tint like this, what we can do now is blend this on top of the base material. And we can do that through an actual blend mode and a mask. So if I right click and add a black mask, now you see, okay, it's completely gone because if I alt click on this mask, our mask is black. And so whenever you have black in your mask, that means 0, and it blocks it out of that layer. If I were to add a white mask, you'll see that it comes back fully because now white means apply it 100% or 0 and 1. So I'll right click and add a black mask. And in this mask, right, you'll see a lot of times I'll switch and I'll do my best to let you know when and where I'm switching. But this little blue outline means I'm in mask mode, while this means on the material layer means I'm in the actual material layer here. So if you notice my material or my settings properties are a little bit different, that's because I'm in here. So now we can add a fill inside of this mask. And I like to add a nice noise, right? That's going to give us this natural, organic, random noise. So one that I use all the time is BNW, which is just black and white. We have spots. So now we have black and white spots. There we go. We alt click now this mask, and this is what we're seeing. So this black and white mask is applying these white and black values to our base color here. And if I were to right click and toggle mask, this is what we see, the original base layer, and that's being masked through this procedural fill that we've added here. So I can right click and toggle that mask again. If I alt click the mask, we now can see we have things like balance. So I can increase the overall values of the mask. I can increase the contrast. So the difference between our lights and darks. We'll leave these pretty much default. You can adjust the scale. And just know that sometimes your procedural noises will have scale down here, or sometimes you'll have to adjust it through tiling. But if it's down here, it means it's procedural and you can affect it via this setting. So then I will select my layer again and we can see now we get this nice blue. However, it is very strong and we want to dial it back because subtlety is key with adding layer by layer details. We can head over to this right menu, which is our blending mode. Now remember, the key thing to understand is we have channels down here and we have channels at the top. And then we have blending mode for each of these channels. So if I change this blending mode to something like overlay, and then I select the number 100, that is the opacity. So just like your standard photo editing software, I can lower the intensity to get something a lot more subtle. And I say intensity, but I mean opacity. So going back to our mood board, we can see that color variation is just doing a base color, mask with noise. We're using blending mode, overlay, and lowering the opacity. That's what's giving us this detail here. So we get something like this. And you can feel free to experiment and change and modify this. I can increase or decrease the scale. I'll stick with 2 scale here, and we'll just continue to move on. And what I'll do is if I already have a base color variation, I'll just Control D and duplicate. Now you want to be careful to not use the exact same type of noise, because instead I'll use now a higher frequency noise. So we can consider this kind of macro noise. So it's larger frequency. So we want to think about it as macro and micro noise. This is more of a macro noise. It's changing the overall color. And if I wanted it to be even larger, like I said, I can reduce the scale. Or for this one will be micro. And one that I like to use is you can actually just straight up type in noise and you have a whole library of noise in here. But if I type in noise, I like moisture noise. There's also another one that's really good. And we can really start to increase the scale on this one. And so we see that we have these different frequencies. So I would consider this color variation one to be more of the micro and this color variation two to be more of the macro, right? There's also things like white noise. I can type in white noise. This is super, super noisy, right? I like typically to use this for my height, so I'll undo that, just kind of show there's different ones. There's another one like cloud. Clouds is really good, right? So clouds is, again, that more macro noise compared to a higher tiled one. That'll give us that high frequency noise. So we'll stick with moisture noise here. You can even adjust it where it's not as contrasty or punchy and increase the tiling just a little bit. If you want to learn game art the right way and not just follow random tutorials, I built a full game art program that walks you through the entire pipeline from an idea to a finished portfolio piece. It's split into 2 courses. Modeling and UV mapping foundations is the first one, and texturing, rendering, and presentation is the second. Each has over 40 modules, 15 hours of narrated content, exercises, time lapses, project files. And you're not doing it alone. You get access to a private Discord community where you can ask questions and get feedback along the way. If you want real-world production workflows you can use for both studio work and your personal projects, the program is live now. I'll see you there. Now, if you're working on an object, this is where tiling is also important. Because our object is pretty nice and simple, UV projection is fine. But when we start to get into our assets, I'll constantly be switching these to triplanar. And we want to switch those in the mask itself. So we would select our moisture and do triplanar. Same thing with B&W black and white spots. I'll select that and change that to triplanar. So we look at that and that's blending fine. And now what we can do is head to our color variation 2. And let's say we now adjust a different type of blending mode with a different type of opacity. I can start to bring this up. It helps to try to push the material properties as much as you can through each of these channels, with this one just being base color. So we've achieved going from this simple, bland material to having nice color variation. And this is all non-destructive, meaning if I feel like I'm getting a little bit too much blue, or if maybe I want to give this a completely different color, like maybe a yellow tint, we absolutely can, right? And we can drop down the opacity, so it's a lot more subtle, right? So you can see how we're going from nice blue, a little bit of yellow, because we can see we're getting some of these different colors and tints coming in through these materials from over the years. So we want to now pick up the pace and do this in each of the respective channels. So like I said, if this is that blue and this is just base color, right? I can right click, make this a blue layer, right click, make this blue. And now we'll add a new layer and we'll call this Rough Variation 1. And in this roughness variation, let's just modify the roughness itself. So I'll enable the roughness. And we need to make sure that there is a noticeable difference between our base rough down here, which is 0.36, to our now layer that's going to affect the roughness channel. So I'll make this from 0.35, about 0.47. And again, let's add a black mask. And this is where the fun really starts to happen, because if I right click in this mask and add a fill, this is where you can really start pushing the storytelling, right? And I like to use grunge. So if we grab or type in the word grunge, this is where we're going to get a ton of different effects here. Concrete, cobwebs, dust. So you can get pretty specific here, even like leak, right? So I type in the word leak, and we have all sorts of these cool grunges for these leaks here. Dust spread, wipes, marks. We have grunge leak large, small, grunge leak dirty. So let's say I throw on grunge leak dirty, and now let's see what's happening here. We're now affecting, right? This is why I like this environment panorama, because this key light really helps see a lot of the details that we want by holding shift and right mouse button. And to push this further, even if I start to really make this rough, right? Now look at that. We're making this a lot rougher here, and it's really looking like it's worn because it's coming from this mask. This is the mask. So if I alt-click this roughness black mask, it's coming from this grunge leaky dirty, and I have complete control. So if we look at our reference here, we look at some of these, we can see that we have a lot of just kind of this noise, this roughness. You know, there's definitely some rust and some details. So we're just going to experiment here, right? So with this grunge leak dirty, we can adjust the base so it's a little bit more noticeable. And then we can dial back so it's not as intense on our roughness, like we stick to that 0.47. But you can also add that color here. Now here's the power of the channels, because let's say I really like the roughness, but I just want to give it a little bit of a tinted color. I can go to my color and I can independently blend these layers. So base color, just so you can understand, I can set this to be completely red, which looks crazy, right? And if I adjust the opacity of this, this is just the opacity of the base color, not the roughness. So if I want to adjust the roughness blend mode, then I come in, I switch this channel to roughness, and now we have power over just the roughness. So you can independently change these. Now I like this roughness level. I'll leave it as is. I'll switch back to base color, and I'll leave this kind of this off-white, a little bit of gray, maybe just even like have it be a little bit, just ever so slightly tinted, kind of this yellow color. And so we get this nice detail coming in. So I'll bring back the opacity as well on the base color. And you can even look at changing the blend mode, but we'll leave this now since it's a bit subtle here with this base color. So with this now, I can select this layer, Control D, duplicate it, and now we can look at adding another layer for roughness variation. And looking at how I broke this up, again, we have these roughness variations with these different type of blending modes, right? And when I select the mask, you'll see that, I'm just letting you know I'm using grunge stain leaky for roughness variation 1. For roughness variation 2, I'm using grunge map 015. So if I jump in here, I can change this grunge leaky. I just do grunge 0. And now we have these kind of random, more procedurally generated type of masks. And you can play with some that are very high contrast like this. or very directional. And like now I have 9, grunge map 9. Let's look at what that's doing. That's pretty intense, right? Because what this is telling me is that white is impacting the roughness to be a lot rougher. So it almost looks like there's this kind of grime detail on here because it's so impactful, right? If I go to grunge map 09, we don't have scale down here, so I can increase the tiling to maybe like 3 or something. And looking at this, again, it's just kind of overpowering. So I could also look at outright inverting the mask. So if I select grunge map 09, I can invert that. So now we start to get more of the base material coming through. And then I can say, hey, you know what? Let's go to our roughness channel. Let's just dial that back down so it's not nearly as intense. So you can control roughness that way. We'll leave that as is. I'll head over and check our 15. We have 15 here. So now we've got this kind of coming in, and we can increase our tiling on this. So I'd say maybe I ended up using about 2. And we can dial back down the roughness so it's not as intense and overpowering. And we can bring back our material or a highlight to really kind of see the detail that's kind of coming in. Now, one thing that you'll start to notice is that as we start to build these, we need to override some of these channels. Meaning, if I look at my base material, we've set this to be fully metallic. That means for our base color, it's using that one metallic, which is fine because we're tinting the color. For roughness, because this is kind of a layer on top, you can go to metal and turn that on and see what that does. And now this completely turns off the metallic for this roughness layer. And sometimes I'll use this here and there. I don't use it all the time because sometimes I do want to affect the roughness of just that metallic layer. Like you can go here, enable roughness, and now, enable metallic. And with a metallic of 0, you can really start to see how that's overpowering compared to where that was. Now for now, I'll leave it as is. I'll leave the metallic because I do want it to inherit the metallic or metalness from this base layer. We'll go to base color and just kind of keep going. Now you see that we have color variation, roughness variation. We can change the roughness value here. Like I said, this is kind of what we're looking at. We can adjust the mask itself, where I go to grunge map, and maybe I reduce the contrast a little bit or adjust the balance here. I can even invert it or keep it as is. You can also randomize the seed to get some pretty cool effects. And now if I change this back to base color, let's add another fill layer and look at height. Now this is where the scratched detail is going to come in. So here, let's start with just height, disable base color, right click, add a black mask. Now the thing when it comes to height is that you do need to have a height value. We'll just start large. 0.1 minus 0.1 is pretty large. Nothing happens yet because we haven't put anything in our black mask. So if I right click my black mask and do fill, we will find now, we'll do grunge, scratch. And you see that there's a lot of these procedurally generated types of grunge scratches. I like to use this one down here, grunge scratch is rough. This is a fully procedural in the sense that I have complete control. I can now say, hey, let's lower the scratch quantity. You can increase the tiling itself, blur the scratches, make it where it's not as thick. So you can really start to make these look thick. And this is where the storytelling aspect comes in where, okay, maybe if we're using these for tools and nails, we don't actually want it to be very wide, right? We want it to be nice and thin here. Now, we're going to come back here, but this is what I meant by this height values is coming from this height value here. So let's set this now to something a lot more subtle, like maybe minus 0.02. We can kind of work with that. And then in our height here, we have scratch is rough. And again, you can continue to modify these to your heart's content. You can even see that we get some dents in here, which is pretty cool. We have scratch dirtiness, double scratch, which is kind of cool. Scratch spots. So those are these little spots here that you have. You can increase the tiling of those spots so they're not as large. So we have all sorts of details here, this is an incredibly powerful grunge scratch here. If I head back, this is where we can say, all right, you know what? Because this scratch is deeper inside of that material, let's impact the roughness and really increase that roughness of just these scratches. Remember, if I alt-click that mask layer, this is the roughness of just what's white, which is just the scratches. Then I can just give this color, make it a little bit off gray. And like if I made this red, this is kind of what we see now, right? We start to see that only the scratches are being affected by base color, height, and roughness, all coming from this mask. So like I said, we'll leave this a little bit here, a little bit of this off gray and gray. So let's right click our roughness layers. That should be the green layer. So right click, that's green. And then our height is coming to be that purple. So we're now starting to understand how we're building our material layer by layer, channel by channel. And with each respective channel, we're impacting it with custom masks. So that's the foundation of the workflow. Here's the main thing I want you to walk away with. PBR texturing is never about pre-made materials or asset libraries. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to drag and drop a material without modifying it. So this workflow teaches you how to control each one of those layers and how every layer blends with whatever's underneath it. Once you start thinking that way, your materials get so much easier to edit, adjust, and push further. And even better, you can start modifying libraries of materials with confidence. So you're not always having to build from scratch, and I talk about that in the course. So if you want the full breakdown, I go through this entire process inside my game art program. Modeling, UVs, baking, texturing, lighting, rendering, all the way through final presentation. And if you're just starting out, practice this on simple assets first, one material, one layer at a time, until it starts to click. Practice with purpose. So with that, I'll see you in the next one.